Everybody, I'm Emilie Aries, Bossed Up's founder and CEO, and I'm so delighted to welcome Lisa Lewis of Career Clarity to the Bossed Up community today. We're both actually tuning in virtually, but from the same city, Denver, Colorado, that we have the good fortune of calling home. Although it is October and there's like 9 inches of snow on the ground, which is a little unusual. But I'm so excited to have you here today, Lisa, because I was just chatting with one of my good friends who works in higher education in the sciences, and she and I were sharing that this sort of year-long story that we've all been living under, with headlines predicting economic doom and gloom, and the reality is that we haven't really seen mass job market disruption yet, but there's been this ongoing prediction for over a year now in the headlines that there's a recession around the corner, has really created almost a norm of uncertainty, almost this like baseline anxiety that everybody in the career services field certainly feels, but really anyone who's wondering about how to advance their career or how to make their next move in navigating whatever career transition they want. Despite really scary and spooky headlines, we've seen pretty consistent jobs growth and job numbers. So I'm really delighted to have you here speaking to that psychology, right? How can we continue to be ambitious and driving our careers forward in an economy that is uncertain in a lot of different ways? So joining us here to chat all about that and give us some tactical and practical advice is Lisa Lewis. Lisa, let me tell our lovely guests a little bit about you here. She's a career change coach and founder of Career Clarity, which is a company that's helped more than 500 multi-passionate, ambitious individuals create the careers they've dreamed of. Her path evolved into coaching after working in digital marketing for nearly a decade at companies like the American Cancer Society, Teen Vogue, 17, and CBS College Sports. She received her coaching certification as one of only 7 coaches in the world trained in the pivot method, and clients praise her ability to see through their excuses, champion their possibilities, and give resume reviews that are like, quote, purifying hellfire. So I'm excited for you to drop some of that hellfire on us today in a way that helps us push forward in a really uncertain economy. Lisa, thanks so much for being here.
Well, Emilie, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I hope I can be doing a little bit less fire and brimstone today and a little bit more practical, tactical strategies and tips for you to figure out how to make this uncertainty, if it's going to be our new normal, something that's easier to deal with and navigate. So thank you all for being here live. I appreciate you guys taking the time and making this a priority out of your day. And thank you to those of you who are watching the webinar recording here. If you are watching this, here are the things you can gain from our conversation today. Number one, we're going to talk about why career pathing is so different for us compared to our parents' generation, which, spoiler alert, is why we get such crappy advice about career pathing. Number two, we're going to talk about a new model for thinking about career pathing in an uncertain economy and world. And then number three, we're going to cover how you can see where innovation and changes are coming in the marketplace for your sector, for your role, for your organization, so that you can be prepared for economic ups and downs and can future-proof your career. So, Colette, I think we heard from you already. If anybody else wants to chime in with who you are and where you're joining us from, you've got the chat bar either at the top or the bottom if you're joining us on a computer, or if you're joining from your phone, you should have a little chat icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And it looks like I will give a little introduction on me as we're hearing from anybody else. So this little nugget over here was little Lisa many, many moons ago. And as I am saying hello from behind the slides over here, some things for you to know about who I am and why I'm here today are that I am a recovering perfectionist, obsessive learner, fellow overachiever to many of you who are doing this career development, professional development stuff. I'm an English breakfast tea lover, an INTJ, and a definite Ravenclaw. But the things that actually make me relevant to you today is that I'm a career change coach who is obsessed with helping create a happier workforce and who's helped more than 500 people make big, bold, badass career transitions. And one of the biggest questions that I think lurks and looms over all of us as we're thinking about career pathing is this one that we are asked so innocently when we are little. What do you want to be when you grow up? Let me know in the chat if anybody ever posed that question to you at a young age. Because while it seems so innocuous on its surface, you're just making conversation, you are just trying to engage somebody, you're trying to relate to a little person. It's a shit question. And it sets the tone for the way that we think about career pathing in our lives. Now, I'll share a quick story for you. When I was in my 20s and I was in Washington, D.C., this big, ambitious city, trying to figure out the pathway that I wanted to take along my own career and life, I kept looking for that one right career for me. Because when you're thinking about that question of what am I supposed to do when I grow up, it has this implicit assumption in there that you're going to find your one thing and then you're going to do it for 40 years and you're going to retire with your pension and kick up your feet and everything's going to be great. So I started out in the nonprofit world and I thought, okay, maybe this is going to be the spot for me. And I tried things there, and almost as if I was treating my career like Goldilocks, my thought was, okay, this bowl of porridge is too cold. This one is not working for me. I don't have enough room to grow and advance, and my salary is not growing and advancing, and this just doesn't feel like the right fit for me. So then I went and hopped over into communications consulting, and I thought, okay, this is going to be the one. I'm going to have finally figured it all out and know exactly what I want to do. And in a Goldilocks world, this bowl of porridge was a little bit too hot. This one was lots and lots of work, lots of hours, lots of stress, lots of pressure, but it did give me opportunities to grow that I wasn't getting in the nonprofit world. And so through my career, I kept making these jumps, trying to find where is the one right thing for me? When have I figured this out? When have I solved it? And what I came to realize was that the pressure I was putting on myself to find that one perfect thing that I was going to do for the rest of my life was actually the problem. Because we're not living in your daddy's economy or job market anymore, right? Back in the day, 7 years ago, the pace of innovation in the market was infinitely slower because resources, time, money, information were less abundant and easily moved. So we used to think about careers back in the day as something you did for your whole time in the workforce. So that question would make sense. And it was oftentimes the thing you went to school for. And it was oftentimes stable and linear. Let me know in the chat if any of you are in the same job that you were in 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and you can see yourself being in that same job or that same organization for the next 20, 30 years of your career. Or let me know in the chat if that is not you too. Yeah, Emilie, totally hear you. It's so true that this is the way that everybody used to think about the economy and the job market, that it was stable, predictable, you just get in, you dig your heels in, you're set, you're there for life. But we are working in a very new playing field. The new playing field is one where the rules of the job have changed so tremendously because technology has created huge shifts in how and what work gets done. And what we have now had to do is evolve our thinking about what career paths ought to be to now be constantly changing instead of that one thing that you do for the rest of your days, probably unrelated to your undergrad degree, and oftentimes uncertain and unpredictable. Because the reality of the world that we live in now is that the job that you could be doing 2 to 3 years from now may not even exist. And I actually wrote an article yesterday about how the job that you're doing right now might not exist in 2 to 3 years, depending on the pace of automation, AI, robotics, all sorts of innovations that are coming to the world. So what we need to do is try on a brand new strategy and brand new mindset. And I love this quote from Jenny Blake. She says, if change is the only constant, let's get better at it. So let's talk about what it will look like and feel like to get really good at navigating change and seeing it as perhaps less threatening and more of an opportunity to keep growing and evolving in our own lives. It requires 2 core mindsets. Number one, that there's not such a thing as a forever job anymore. So that mental model is no good. And anybody who is giving you career advice coming from that as being a foundational assumption is somebody who maybe you should talk to with a grain of salt. But mental model and mindset number 2 is that you have to be prepared to either pivot and take charge of your own path and your own shifts, or get pivoted, where your future self's employment is going to be your current self's responsibility to set up the pathways for. Now, if you want to learn more about this mindset stuff because you think it is fabulous, I've got a resource on my website, getcareerclarity.com, that is the ebook all about the roadmap to a fulfilling career and the mindsets and strategy that it takes for that. But for our conversation for today in particular, I want to introduce you to an agile model for navigating career instability and effectively adulting writ large. And it's called the Pivot Method by Jenny Blake. As Emilie said in the introduction, I'm one of 7 coaches in the world who's trained in the Pivot Method, and I've become a huge evangelist for it and want to spread the gospel about thinking about your career and life through these terms, because it prepares us for all sorts of uncertainty that is coming next, be it a recession, be it downsizing, be it needing to make a geographic shift because something's changed in your own life. So here is the Pivot Method at a glance in its 4 stages, but we'll walk through each of these stages independently, starting with stage number 1, the plant stage. So when you are trying to navigate a decision in your own career, the best place to start from is where you are right now and what's already working. So when you think about what might be next, if you're thinking about, oh my gosh, I need to go back to school and change everything about who I am and my strengths and gifts and what I want to do, it's oftentimes, number 1, super duper risky. And number 2, it's not necessarily going to work for you. You don't have the data to prove and show that something that is so foreign and different and odd for you may be a good fit, because your track record and your history says that you have tended to naturally gravitate towards certain things. So there are lots of people who think about career pathing and career development from the context of, well, you got to shore up your strengths and you got to learn the things that you don't already know. But the pivot model is really based on how do we use what's working, your strengths, your gifts, and the inspirational idea that you have about what you want your future to look like, to then start to map out what could come next for you. The next phase in the pivot method is the scan phase. And this is the phase where you take that idea of that inspirational vision of the future and what you're already working with and that intersection point, and you start evaluating where you see pieces of that in the marketplace and in the job market. So it could be that in the scan stage, you are starting to do research into other companies that are similar to your company but have a different department of blah, 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 or who are working maybe in a different market but solving a similar problem, or who are maybe staying in the same sector but solving a different problem to what you're doing right now. Scan is about looking in the environment, taking it all in, information gathering, knowledge gathering, relationship gathering, and getting a really good foundational groundwork of information to help you make better decisions about what you want to try next. And the try next part is the third part of the pivot model, which is called the pilot phase. Like we talked about in plant, if you were going to throw out all your strengths, try to shore up your weaknesses, and pull a total 180 in your career, it's really risky because you don't have any data to show you whether or not you like something. The pilot part of the pivot method is all about finding a way to design a small scale experiment so that you can test out and try a potential new direction to get the experiential data to show you if either you like it and it's great and you totally want to double down in that direction, or if it's something that doesn't quite feel like a super great fit for you. You tried it out, you played with it, you allowed yourself to be a beginner and do something totally new and outside of your comfort zone, and actually you hated it. Because getting that sort of clarity, either whether it's a heck yes or a heck no, is hugely helpful in decision-making clarity and then recalibrating to figure out what you want to try out next. So the pilot method, or the pilot part of the pivot method, is a critically important risk management step. But once you've gone through that and you have done the risk management, run some small scale experiments, gathered some information that says, yeah, this direction that I'm curious about actually could feel really good for me to start to pivot into, then you get to go into the last part of the pivot method, which is named appropriately pivot. That's when you go all in to go all out and make the shift into whatever new thing is in front of you that feels like it could be really good. And one of the things to talk about with the pivot method is that the pivot method typically always feels better when you're doing it under your own control, right? So if you start to do this kind of work proactively, planting yourself and identifying what your gifts are and what you love doing and what you'd love to do more of, instead of waiting for a departmental reorganization or being downsized or laid off or something else like that to happen, you are always going to feel like you have more choices and more options. But this method totally works if you get pivoted too, and your economy or your opportunity kicks you in the face. You can always still use the same steps to say, okay, who am I? What do I do? What matters to me? What's out there in the world that I might be able to move into? How do I try it on to make sure that it feels like it could be a really good fit for me? And then how do I make the pivot into actually doing that full time if my pilot goes really well and I'm excited and this all is feeling awesome? So let me pause there for a moment, because I know that the pivot method is a very different mindset for thinking about how to navigate your own career, both in times that feel good and in times that are feeling a little bit more uncertain. And let me look to the chat really quick and ask, who's got any questions about this? Does this all make sense to you? And if this is making sense to you, if you had to put yourself in one of these 4 phases of the pivot method, let me know in the chat which one or ones feel like they are the most resonant with where you are in your own career cycle right now.
I love that question, Lisa. And I want to ask you if you could expand upon this concept of duplicating what's working, right? Because so many people, when they come to Bossed Up because they're like, I need to shift my career, are really focused on what's not working, right? That's what's right in front of you. I'm uncomfortable. I'm burnt out. I feel disempowered. I feel frustrated. I feel like I'm wasting my life. You know, what's not working is so loud. How do you help people get to identifying what is working, and what's the benefit of doing that?
Yeah, great question. So there are 2 different ways to think about that. Number one is that almost all of us will always have an easier time seeing what's not working than what is, because what's not working is causing pain,
Right.
right? And the pain and the frustration and the anxiety and the anger and all that stuff screams pretty loudly to us that something is wrong and needs to be fixed. But if you
Totally.
take a minute and sit with what's not working, usually you can use that pretty prescriptively to write out what you wish was happening. So let's say that you feel like your satisfaction with your job is at about a 2 out of 10, and you're trying to figure out what a 10 out of 10 would look like and feel like.
Right.
You can write down each of the things that you're feeling discontent about. I feel like my boss doesn't value me and isn't giving me space to air my ideas and to share. And then you can write, what would be that analog? What would be the, like, you know, explosion of unicorns and kittens out of your computer if things were perfect? And it would be, okay, my boss is absolutely taking me seriously, giving me a platform to speak, elevating my voice. So that's one really easy, concrete way.
I love that. I described something similar that came up in the Bossed Up book about jealousy, because we're taught to just suppress our own feelings of jealousy and envy because they're not nice to have. And so we deny them altogether. But it's like flipping the script on our negative emotions can actually be very illuminating. So if I actually see, why do I feel jealous of this person? If I actually ask myself, what's underneath it? What is it? You know, what is the story that I have in my head about that person? Like you're saying, you can flip that into, well, here's what I actually want, and then start to make progress on that. Easier said than done psychologically, but I think that's why working with someone on that can be so helpful, right?
Sure. Well, and I'll say 2 things on that too. It might seem easier said than done, but I actually find that the hard part isn't identifying what you want after you've identified what you don't want. It's giving yourself permission to believe that you can have what you want.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when you're writing out what this dream job would look like, you might look at that and think, oh, that's a nice pipe dream. Like being in a place where my manager appreciates me and values me and elevates my voice and where I'm being compensated well. And if you're treating it like it's not possible, the way that the neuroscience and the psychology of our brains works is that your brain is actively always scanning the environment around you for information. It's called the confirmation bias.
Yeah.
There's so much information out there that your brain starts categorizing and looking for specific information that validates beliefs that you have, and will downright ignore information that would contradict beliefs that you have.
Right.
So if you
So it's
believe that
like,
it's a pipe dream, you're going to be right because you're only going to find the evidence to validate that.
So it's like you're saying you have to feel worthy before you'll actually make progress. Like I mean, and that is deep work, right? Feeling worthy of your most audacious desires, most audacious career aspirations. It takes a leap of faith You know what I mean? And I'm not the most woo-woo person. Like, you know that we're pretty research driven here, but it really does take that belief that you are worthy, that you deserve that audacious vision for your career to start making progress on seeing the opportunities that will actually help you make it happen. That's real.
Yeah, well,
I'm gonna mute myself again, but I just wanted to chime in here with a little question, and I appreciate you pausing for those.
yeah, totally. Well, and let me say too that I don't think that you actually have to believe that you are worthy.
Uh-huh.
You just have to be willing to play with the idea, play with the thought that this could actually exist out there, and give your brain permission to just start running and looking to use confirmation bias to your benefit to seek out the information that might prove that it's actually possible. Because
Interesting.
oftentimes it can be the brain ninja work of giving yourself permission to think the thought that it might be possible that
Hmm.
allows for you to find the data points to convince yourself to believe that
Yeah.
it's possible. So you don't even have to believe that you're worthy of it. You just have to give yourself permission to think the thought and let
Yeah.
your brain do the research and find the data to support that that thought could be true.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah. One last thing that I'll say too on your point about how do you go from not knowing what you want into figuring out what you want is that in the work that I do at the Career Clarity Company, we've actually come up with a 4-point framework that we call the 4 pillars of career fulfillment that we have seen are the 4 things that you need to have self-awareness on that will drive you towards jobs that are a good fit for you. So if anybody's interested in hearing a little bit more about that, I'm not sure that we'll have time to go deeply into all that in today's webinar. You can, of course, go check out the website at getcareerclarity.com and download the ebook. But I'll give you the quick version, which is that the 4 core drivers of satisfaction in a job long-term are, number 1, how does this job allow for you to use and grow your strengths and gifts? Number 2, how does the opportunity allow for you to solve problems that are interesting to you, both in your role, your team, your department, your organization, and in the sector? Core question number 3 is, how does the culture of the organization that you're in and the culture of the team match up with your personality and the way that you are naturally wired? And question number 4 is, how does the opportunity align with the kind of benefits that you want from work and how you want, your work to fit into your life, right? Because so many people don't really want to live to work. They'd rather work to live and have a really rich, holistic life. And they're fine with a good enough job that plugs in and allows for them to have a holistic existence that feels rich and satisfying and life-giving. So identifying what your wants are and what's working in each of those 4 pillars, and then figuring out what a 10 out of 10 and killing it in each of those 4 pillars would look like, can allow for you to think about the scanning part of identifying what's out there and what could be next really differently. I'll double check in the chat box to see if anybody else has thrown in any other questions on that pivot methodology and how to use it to navigate uncertainty. And it looks like none yet, but please feel free to jump in the chat box if you have any additional ones. But one thing that I want to talk about with respect to our particular focus for today is the scan stage. Awesome. Thanks, Emily. So as we were talking about this cycle, the plant, figure out what's working, scan, look at what's out there in the environment, the pilot, try things on, and then the launch or the pivot to actually move you on into what could be next. One of the critical pieces for navigating uncertainty in the economy is spending a lot of good time right here in the scan part of things. Because the more information and more awareness you have of what's out there in the marketplace and what you can do, the better informed the decision is that you're going to be able to make, and the more you're going to be able to understand what all your options and choices look like. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here. So when you're ready to start thinking about what might be out there in the environment, again, we've got to remember that that old mental model that, our parents' generation or their parents' generation is perpetuating about what careers should be isn't necessarily equipped to help you think about how to scan. In fact, it's almost equipped to make you feel guilty for scanning and looking for what else might be out there. Because the old model is like, just stick it out, just put your head down, you're safe here, they value you, you've got a job, you should be grateful. I oftentimes will call this gratitude shaming, when we sort of try to guilt ourselves into believing that our feelings of uncertainty or unrest or antsiness to find something else aren't valid or we make them bad feelings, we can tell ourselves, like, yes, you can try to make the best of a bad situation, but at the point at which you're bullying yourself into staying by saying, just stick it out, suck it up, you're just being a needy millennial or a needy Gen Xer or a needy whatever it is, we're actually engaging in some bullying and some self-abuse. And when that's happening, there's something deeper going on about giving yourself permission to have needs that are out of alignment with this old belief system. And when we're thinking about scanning and looking at the environment for new information, there also used to be limited information and human capital mobility, right? Like in our grandparents' generation, they didn't have the internet to find new jobs and opportunities and new companies in their area. They didn't have the internet to teach them how to do things that they had never done before in their careers. And the old model, and what a lot of older generations oftentimes will try to espouse, is that you just need to make the best of your situation. That certain unhappiness is better than uncertain futures of a lot more happiness. And if you're picking unhappiness over uncertainty, that's going to make for a really, really long life. So the new ways to think about the scan part of this equation are by giving yourself permission to do your research, see what's out there, take in all the information, and give yourself permission to explore available possibilities outside of your current role, department, or industry. And notice too, that there can be a possibility outside of your current role that stays with your company. There can be an opportunity outside of your current department that stays with your company. So if you're really liking your company, but say you're working in a customer service function and you realize the writing is on the wall that this function is not going to exist in 5 years because it's going to be automated or go to AI or robots, then you can start looking at other ways that you can be contributing within your organization, where you still get to have the same mission, you still get to have similar colleagues, but you get to move into a role that's going to give you more of a future and more opportunities to grow. And the biggest part of the new model is the essence of trying new things out, giving yourself permission to be a beginner and play with something that feels a little bit outside of your certainty zone, but that could leverage some of your existing strengths. And again, what was working, to map out what else might be next.
I've got a question about uncertainty.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't turn my camera on and off today, so I'm using a very dramatic curtain reveal. But my question is about uncertainty in this process when coupled with uncertainty in the markets. So I hear what you're saying about choosing unhappiness because uncertainty is too scary and feels like it's a waste of time. But when you're so busy, delivering so much for your current role and trying to get dinner on the table or whatever it is, take care of aging parents, think about starting a family or, giving back to your community or just like enjoying a Netflix binge every now and then. I think some people make the cost benefit analysis in their head, which is, why should I bother trying new things out, giving myself permission to explore if there's a recession around the corner and it's all doom and gloom anyway? So how do you coach people on like embracing the unknown if their time is so limited and they feel like they don't have the privilege of having time and resources to spare right now to afford them the possibility of exploring?
Yeah, well, so the first thing to explore is it actually a priority to explore for you right now?
Yeah.
Because if it's not, there's no shame in that game, right? Like if you've got other stuff going on in your world that is feeling like it's taking up more of your time and you're feeling like this is not something that you have the brain space or the capacity to think about or care about right now, I do not want to in any way shame you or blame you into saying you need to do this right now or else.
Yeah.
What I will say is that getting pivoted is a lot less fun than getting to be in the driver's seat of your own pivot. So if there's a part of you that is feeling sort of curious and wondering and worrying about what's next, but also has a fear that, oh my gosh, how am I going to find the time to go back to school and get a new degree or whatever it is, then what I want to say to you is that this can be as teeny tiny as you need or want it to be, right? And I almost talk to clients about this sort of duality of, I want to help you dream bigger than you have ever thought possible for yourself. And I want you to be taking actions that feel so small, they almost feel silly.
Yeah.
Because that's how you build up momentum and that's how you find the time. right? Because if
Can
we
you give
talk
us an
about on a,
example of one of those small steps? What did
sure,
it look like?
sure. Well, first, let me say too that when something is important in our lives,
Yeah.
we find a way to make the time to do it,
Right. Right.
right? That we all say, like, oh my gosh, I don't have time. I wish I could do this, but I just can't. But like, if the person who can open up a door for you for a new job said, hey, do you have time to get coffee this week? You'll probably like get a babysitter, outsource something, tell somebody that you need to do something late. You know,
Right.
you will
Right.
flip tables and move mountains to find a way to make it a priority.
Right.
And so tapping into that same ability for yourself to try something new, even if it's a teeny baby step, can be really powerful.
Right.
But to your question about what a teeny baby step could be,
Yeah.
it could be something like, say, you're curious about exploring a new job function, and you happen to know that your current organization has that job function. Maybe you're a teacher and you're curious about becoming an instructional coach. A teeny baby step could be sending an email or a text to the person who's the instructional coach on your team right now, just to say, hey, would you have time to grab coffee after work sometime this week? Or
I
even
am
just catching that person in the
I'm
hallway.
so into the coffee meeting as progress. Honestly, like I think networking and conversation, person to person conversation about your aspirations is one of the most overlooked and most important parts of any pivot. Would you agree?
Totally, totally. And I think we're actually going to get into a little bit of that here as we go, because
I should let you
this,
get into it then.
no, no, no. Well, I think this is a good question, and I'm glad you're bringing it up, because sometimes it can feel like, oh my gosh, the only way to make a pivot is if I quit my job and I go back to school and I take on $100,000 of student loan debt. And the answer is never, never that that's where you need to start. If
Right.
that's the direction that you need to go in, and you've done enough of these teeny baby step actions to get the data to validate that, it makes the decision to invest in that way easier, because you've answered all the uncertainty questions that were in between you and making that decision.
Mm.
But if that decision doesn't feel clear to you, it's a great time to figure out, how do I structure a teeny baby step to learn more? And the baby step could be, let me go on to Coursera.com and just do a search tonight and see how many courses do they have on, an introduction to business administration or an
Right.
introduction to social work. Do they even have any courses? And that could be your baby
LinkedIn
step.
Learning is also a great place to do that. I'm a little biased
Totally.
because I work with them now, but yeah. No, I think you're right. Like information gathering digitally or through human beings is part of the process. And that can be like a baby step that feels like you're making micro progress. Yes?
Yeah. Well, and micro progress is all that regular big progress ever
Yeah.
is, right? It's just a whole bunch of little baby steps that are linked together in a chain.
I love it.
So if you give yourself permission to do the teeniest, tiniest little thing that's going to give you forward motion, then you're making progress, and that's important. So let me keep on rolling here. But if you guys have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to chime in the chat box or in the Q&A box. But I wanted to talk exactly about some of the things that Emilie just brought up, about ways to identify what the heck is out there, so that you can come up with strategies for exposure to new ideas and trends that can help you manage risk that might be coming in your industry, in your company, or maybe even in your job. So I want to make this a little bit participational and conversational. So please chime in the chat box, or you can even use the Q&A function to submit a question or a response here. But one of the biggest things to do as you're thinking about trends that are coming in the world and in your sector and how you can prepare for them is that the robots are coming is a very persuasive, compelling storyline right now, right? If there is one article that the news loves even more than like millennials are killing the plastic industry, millennials are killing the fast food industry, it's the fear-mongering clickbait of robots are coming to take over the blah industry, or taxi drivers are soon to be put out of having a job by self-driving cars. So a really good question to ask yourself as you're trying to see around corners and see what's coming for your job role is, what are the kinds of things that robots can do easily? So throw some ideas out there. Let me know in the chat what you think that robots can do really easily, and maybe even are doing already, right? Because it's kind of hard to make metal and electricity do exactly the same things that a very complex evolutionary human body can do. Emily, I appreciate your laughter here. So one of the things Emily's chiming in with is providing predictive answers for search questions. So absolutely, robots can do things that are involving a lot of data and clear processes that are very linear. So when, say, Google search is seeing enough people search for the exact same thing over and over again, it doesn't take a human's complex, interesting, intricate brain to notice that there's a trend there and then to surface that and put that into their algorithm. But when we think about the kinds of things that robots can't do as easily, robots can't necessarily do things like have discretion. They can't necessarily be strategic. They can't necessarily be empathetic as easily, although there are a lot of people in the engineering world who are trying to work on changing and fixing that. And so when we think about things that the human brain and heart have an advantage at doing, it's going to be things like connecting with people, thinking through psychology, guiding, seeing the big picture in things, creating instructions, brainstorming. Jane's chiming in the chat to say, not really a robot necessarily, but some of the brands I work with are starting to have clients submit their own wholesale orders online instead of through their sales reps. Yeah, absolutely. The kinds of things that are getting automated are things that are really structured and linear and processed. You know, it's probably to an organization's benefit to have people putting their orders directly in, because then if there's any human error, it's on the orderer's side and not on the sales rep side. But thinking about what sales reps can do as they're starting to navigate what might be next in their own careers and career paths could be leaning into, again, the things where the human brain and the human heart have an advantage, which could be connecting with people. It could be in sharing a really impassioned marketing plea to talk about the product or the service that you're bringing to the world and why it's valuable and important, and helping to get people excited about going to those automated order forms and filling them out. So Jane, I love that feedback, but thinking about the question for yourself in your own industry and in your own direction about what kinds of problems need solving that haven't been addressed yet can be a great way to start to see the trends that a specific industry or organization maybe need to be hopping on that haven't been hopped on yet. I'll tell you that I used to date a guy back when I lived in DC whose dad was a futurist, which is an occupation where you are talking about the trends that are coming up. That's your whole profession, is going into companies or doing lectures, talking about the direction that things seem to be going in, and then helping them to paint the picture of where things might be 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the line. Like, say, working with Nestle to talk to them about global warming and figure out if your cocoa bean growing regions of the world are changing, how do you start planting things now that are going to have the returns that you're going to want in the next 5, 10, 20 years? And they talk a lot about the idea of trying to think big and answer those problems. Those are the sorts of problems that, while a robot might be able to give you an algorithm for, only human beings can make the decisions on about where you want to make an investment and how that fits into the big picture strategic vision of where things are going. And similarly, you know, as a futurist, this person had also been talking to, say, the New York Department of State about how they could add more automation and robotics into some of the social services and welfare work that they were doing. But you're never going to be able to find a robot who can have the same kind of connection and empathic opportunities and abilities that sitting down face to face with another human being can create. So think about where your human brain and heart have an advantage over processes that are linear, easy to repeat, very data-driven, very sort of task-oriented. Think about some of the more creative, sticky, tricky problems that you can be playing with instead. Then another thing to think about when it comes to future-proofing yourself and your career is this idea of diversification. I was an economics major back in the day in college, clearly not using that a whole lot in my career coaching work today. But one of the concepts that stuck with me is this idea that if you put all of your eggs into one basket, you make yourself very sustainable or very susceptible to uncertainty coming and smacking you like a 2x4 in the head, right? If you've only ever done your one thing, let's say that you were a dentist and you went to dental school, you got your DDS, you've been practicing for 30 years, and then all of a sudden there's a robot that comes along that can do teeth cleanings more efficiently and with fewer injuries, fewer problems, and can even do some of the surgeries better than you can with your own hands. That's a really risky, really undiversified place to be, right? It's going to be really tricky to figure out what comes next after that. But if you're the sort of person who has a lot of different interests and gives yourself permission to explore and pursue those interests, even if it's taking an improv class or an art class or a cooking class, just the fact that you are exposing yourself to different skill sets and different ideas and different industries means that if for some reason you got pivoted and needed to find something else, you already have a larger base of knowledge and information to draw from to figure out what could be next than our poor friend, the dentist. So thinking about how you could be diversifying your career and your happiness and all sorts of stuff can make it so that you will have many more foundational pieces to stand on when things start to get a little uncertain or shifty around you. So I'd be so curious to hear from anybody in the chat about what you're doing to create diversification in your own life, be it in your career or be it in the rest of your life. You know, it can be friendship diversification, right? If you only have one person who's your bestie and you talk to that person every single day, and then you guys have an explosive fight and things blow up, that's a lot of pressure to be putting on that one friendship, and it exposes you to a ton of risk if things aren't feeling good. So diversification can show up in all kinds of different places in our lives to help make us happier, healthier, and safer. Let me take a look at what is going on in the chat. Emilie's chiming in, y'all. She says, we overly identify via our careers in the United States, and our identities can be so much more than what we can do. And I totally agree with that. And I'll tell you, I've got some examples from different clients that I've worked with in the past where something that they let themselves pursue for fun actually then became leveraged enough to become a part of the career path that they moved on into. So for example, I have a client named Tanya, and she lives in London. She's an American expat, so she had to deal with the work visa piece, and we did that piece together. But she used to work in events and media and was done with it. And she was really, really craving an opportunity to do something that gave her so much more work-life balance. She knew that she loved taking yoga classes at 10 a.m. and she wanted to go to a place where they would really support and encourage her to lean into interests like fitness, wellness, etc. And as we took that, we started to build a picture of what might be possible for her in her own career pivot and trajectory. What we figured out was actually that there were a lot of jobs in which she could do yoga and get paid for it. It could be a part of the work and of the value that she was providing to her employer. And we actually helped for her to land a job working at Wanderlust, managing all their European events. So when she was going to yoga classes, they were paying for it because it was market research and relationship building. So giving yourself permission to diversify and pursue your interests, be they yoga, be they pottery, be they, I don't know, creating your own game or creating your own knitting patterns or whatnot, can oftentimes sprout legs and create momentum to bring more joy and interest into your work life. Anybody else talking about how they're diversifying in their career or in the rest of their lives? Let me know via the chat box or via the Q&A. But I'll come to one of the points to land on for today, which is that if you take one thing away from this presentation today, let it be this, that if you are feeling nervous or uncertain about what's coming in terms of a recession, in terms of shifts to your own company or to your own sector, or about what's happening with technology and automation, that if you are intentionally exposing yourself to new ideas, new people, and new skill sets, and diversifying all of that, and giving yourself permission to be a beginner and try out things that might feel a little stretchy and uncomfortable, but allow for you to lean on what's working to create some pathways towards what's next, it will serve you. And that's whether that is a side hustle, whether it is friendships, whether it is a new job, whether it is creating a podcast or a speaking career or something else, it will absolutely open up some possibilities for you. Monica, I love that. Thank you so much for chiming in the chat. Monica said, my side hustle became my full-time hustle in 2017. Stuff that I was doing for fun became my job. And volunteering can be a great way to do other things too. And I'll tell you, Monica, I had a really similar story for how I got into career coaching. I had been super unhappy in corporate doing digital marketing and branding work. And I had decided, you know what, I think I want to go back to school and become a therapist. And I thought, hold on a second. Going back to school and getting a master's degree is a lot. Let me do a small scale experiment. Let me try something out and do my own pilot to figure out if this feels good for me before I commit and invest and go big in this way. So what I did was I started volunteering for Crisis Text Line. It was a totally volunteer organization. It was 4 hours a week. It was no investment by me. And it gave me a chance to learn a ton about mental health and wellness, and then to actually get to practice a skill set being a volunteer crisis counselor. And what I learned from doing that volunteer experiment is that actually I didn't want to be a therapist. It's an incredible job, and I felt so fulfilled. And I also felt so drained from doing the work that I could not imagine taking that 4 hours a week and turning it into 40 hours a week. Then fast forward a year later, I'm still feeling like I want to get out of the job that I'm in, but I know that therapy is not the route for me to go. And I talked to a career coach who says, you know, you've got a lot of the skills and capabilities to do career coaching. And so I started a side hustle on top of my regular 9-to-5 job in marketing, doing career coaching and advising. And little did I know that, you know, a year and a half later, that little teeny side hustle would actually enable and empower me to go full time into making a total career switch of my own. Yeah, looking in the chat, Emilie saying, my diversification this year has been through my activism on the local political level here in Colorado. Love that. As many of you probably know, Emilie has got some deep roots into organizing and politics. So getting to see her getting back into that and weaving some old passions and interests into her new life is awesome too. And Monica is chiming in too to say our energy is so revealing. And again, as you're thinking about the plant stage of the pivot cycle, think about where your energy is and how you can leverage that and where your energy is working and flowing to move into what's next. And then Monica said, my volunteering has been focused on advocacy for kids, which has led to some speaking gigs. And who knows how much that might be able to then continue to grow and develop into a side hustle and a revenue stream for you, Monica. That's super exciting. And Emilie, I hear you that it's nice to do things that you're interested in as a hobby. What you're doing is you're doing your pilots right now and recognizing, all right, I don't really want to go back into this as a full-time job, and now I know it, but I can still do it in a way that brings me joy. So giving yourself permission to take on a pilot and try something and play with it can be so helpful in getting clarity in your uncertainty on what you actually want to double down on and move into next. So that is everything that I wanted to make sure to cover with all of you today at Bossed Up. And I'm so grateful for your wonderful participation and all the thoughts and questions, especially Monica and Jane and Emilie. And I wanted to leave you with a brief note about how we can get in touch if you found this to be interesting and you want to keep learning more. You are welcome to send me an email directly to lisa@getcareerclarity.com. Or please feel free to check out anything on my website. I have got a quiz about which driver of career fulfillment is most important to you that could be really helpful and instrumental for you. So check that out at getcareerclarity.com. And please feel free to send me an email if you'd be interested in hopping on a call too, to talk about what's going on in your world, what you're wanting, what you're needing, and everything that we talked about today, to see if there are any ways that I might be able to help support you in making that transition.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your time today. I want to encourage everybody, just echoing some of what you mentioned today, to not allow the uncertain headlines that we're all living under to prevent you from entering the cycle, right? From entering that exploratory stage and from starting to make those micro investments or bigger investments in yourself and in your happiness. Because I'm all about keeping my, finger on the pulse when it comes to our economy, but I'm also seeing that the headlines can be overblown. And until those headlines are reflected in our actual reality, we shouldn't be putting our foot on the brake prematurely. So keep driving, keep striving, keep bossing, as I always say, and keep exploring what's going to make sense for how you move forward. And amazing people like Lisa here are here to help. Angus has raised her hand. Angus, if you've got anything to share, please do so in chat or through the Q&A function, just because we can't mic you through the webinar. So if you accidentally hit raise your hand by accident, not to worry. But I will make sure to email this replay out to everybody who registered today, including those of you who couldn't join us live. And in that email, I'll make sure to include links to getcareerclarity.com so you can take Lisa's assessment. You can hear from Lisa soon or get in touch with her directly. And Lisa, again, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your attention today. Thanks to everyone for joining, and thanks for being part of the Bossed Up community. It's such a delight.
Keep bossing, y'all. This has been great.
Awesome.